this is working today is we have a cemetery part of the tour and we have the Cumberlandite part of the tour. And so you'll spend some time with me, and then we're gonna switch with a group that's been with Mark, who is a geologist, and you'll get to go out to that outcropping, which is in the woods. So we're starting in the cemetery, and there is some Cumberlandite in this cemetery, but we're mostly gonna be setting the stage for what you're going to see after. We're going in a bit of a reverse chronological order. Mark is a geologist who works for the state, and he cares about things that happened hundreds of millions of years ago and tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago. We're gonna be talking about people today who were alive even 100 years ago. So something a little bit more recent. Geologists care about pressure and time. Historians care about those things too, right? What changes in a person's lifetime and what have they left behind for us? So I'm gonna talk briefly here about this stone, and then we're gonna talk about the gentleman who has a flag in front of his stone and what is surrounding us here. Talk a bit about that crypt. If you have questions for me, I really encourage you to ask. I am happy to take them. If you missed it at the beginning, I'm Allison. I work as a park ranger for Blackstone River Valley National Historical Park. Now, usually I'm locked away in an old mill. So this is my day pass, my day out into the wilds of Cumberland. And I'm gonna have someone help me by passing around a map that's going to give you a sense of what this area looked like close to 200 years ago. Now, I want you to look around you and think about what this land is good for and what this land might give you some challenges with. How many of you have a garden or you've ever had to dig somewhere? This land is going to give us some challenges. And so we know that going back thousands of years ago, we know that the Narragansett and the Wampanoag who lived in this area and still live in this area, they saw this as a great place to winter, to spend this time of year. And that's because of what's still all around us today. This is a very heavily forested area, so it's a great place to kind of spend those colder months. But there's also iron ore, and we know that the first tool makers lived here thousands of years ago, and they were the Narragansett, making tools. Now, where we are today, this land is named after Elder Ballou. He was a minister at a meeting house that would have been just across the way. As that map comes around, you're gonna see that meeting house marked off, and you're gonna see where that iron ore hill is marked off. You're also gonna notice that this is a very hilly place. When we get up to the top part of the cemetery, you're gonna see another huge mass of land over there, just a big old hill. The colonists who come out here are called the Balloos in the 16 and 1700s, and they are Baptists. And they wanna get away from Providence out to what they considered the wilderness. And they're gonna set up farms, and they're gonna set up livelihoods out here. You have the photo of the house. I'm gonna pass around a photo of a house that belonged to a Noah Ballou. This is what a lot of these people lived in, going back to that period. One of the things that starts to happen is they have to, this bottom one right here, we'll pass it around. People like Noah Ballou, they have babies, they start lives here, they farm. They also lose people that they love. And some of those people they're going to bury in the ground that we're standing on. So what starts as a family burial ground is going to grow into something much bigger, because that meeting house that was there till the 1960s, that pulls people here. So folks are living here and having a life around here. Now, I picked this one at random. I just decided we would start here because it's a good location, and something made me curious. One of the people who is remembered on this stone is Emily Place. Emily died when she was 20, and I wanted to know why. For different people in this cemetery, we don't know a lot about them. We actually know some things about Emily because of when she died. If you want to get closer or take a look around here, something I didn't notice in person that I noticed on paper at home is Emily, her mother, and her father all died in the same year, but they actually all died between April and September of the same year. They started to think, well, what else was happening in the 1840s? There was a huge outbreak of consumption. We've all been living through a pandemic the past few years. We know what it's like to live through an outbreak of disease. When the gentleman who's remembered here passes away, it's April, and he dies of what they call lung disease. Very vague. Within the next few months, both his wife and his daughter die officially of consumption. In Rhode Island and Massachusetts, they didn't know they had a problem until May, when lots more people were dying. Now I mention them because they lived out on a farm. They were pretty lucky. A lot of people by the 1840s didn't live on farms. They were in factory cities where you lived and worked really close together, and you might get sick pretty often. Unfortunately, not too different from our world today. Now, someone who lived just after that lifetime, who was born around the time they pass away, is Edward, and his stone is right over there. Whenever we see a flag in a cemetery, we usually know that it's someone who served our country. So that's something we can learn about them right away. Edward Wright doesn't really have a lot of connections to this area. So I was trying to figure out why he's here. Well, it turns out that when he was in his 20s, he was working as a laborer, and he met a woman who was from this area. They get married, and he enlists in the Civil War. He serves in the 21st Massachusetts, and he makes it back. 2 years after he makes it back, he dies of a disease to the liver. We don't know why. We don't know how exactly that happened. We do know that his wife is going to live until 1920. She dies of heart disease in 1920, but she lived all those years, 1867 to 1920, back in Uxbridge. So she stays there for whatever reason. I wanted to tell his story because the person who takes care of him is Henry Capron, and he's an undertaker from Uxbridge, Massachusetts. Uxbridge to here today is like probably a 30-minute or so drive. That's a journey with a dead body in 1867, and he died in January. So let's imagine, even if they have one day like today, that's a difficult problem to have. A lot of the Balloux were ministers, so they were with people when they died. They took care of their funerals. And something they did in this kind of community is they built crypts. That's what you're seeing over to the side. They built places where the dead could be stored in winter. So a good chance that our friend here, Edward, was stored either in that crypt or another crypt until they could break through to the ground. Any questions over here?
I have a question. How do you know all this? I mean, did they have to register? Yes, somebody dies in Cumberland now, it's in the town hall, but then, and even here, this is Cumberland, right? And as you say, Oxbridge is not too close.
Yeah, so how do we know how people died? We know how some people died in here because they write it and they have it inscribed on the stone. So some people want everyone to know that, so they put it on the stone. There's a few drowning deaths that are marked right with an inscription. How I know about these people? A few different things. I looked up his Civil War record. I looked up his wife. I looked up the daughter that they have. I looked up all these people. Someone, either this guy faked his death or someone got the record wrong. Someone claimed that this man had 2 daughters, the second of whom lived out in Arkansas with him. It's a mistake. It's not the same guy. So you have to look through all of the records, but people start to take better records on a city level or a town level of death for vital statistics. We also know how people died because ministers would record it in logbooks as part of their service for funerals.
And it's well preserved by the Rhode Island archives, and when you go to research, you have good access to a lot of things that you want to see.
So we owe a lot to genealogists. It's really genealogists who started a lot of this work, and very early preservationists, people who said we should keep records of these people. It is easier now than it ever was to learn about ordinary people. This took me hours. This would have taken years, even about 15 or so years ago. So we'll head up the hill just a bit.
If we look in these,
so one of you asked a question about, how we find this kind of information, and we should also say that this cemetery was in really bad shape about 50 or so years ago, and so we're really lucky that we're able to walk here today. A lot of the work in Rhode Island, almost all of it, to take care of cemeteries is done totally by volunteers, people who just care a lot about historic cemeteries and want to make sure that we're respecting the people who aren't here with us anymore. This is a great example of a stone that's clearly had some nice work done to it. This belongs to Levi Tower. Levi Tower also served his country. You can tell because he's marked as a veteran of the United States. There are some people who also did military service here, and this cemetery is so old, it's pre-United States. So quite a few men who served in the French and Indian War and other battles in this area. So he was married to a woman named Mary Whipple, and if you live or you drive around, Whipples are everywhere. Balloos are everywhere. And I picked Levi Tower to research because I didn't just want to talk about balloons. That was a fool's errand in this cemetery because just about everybody is related. So I started researching Captain Levi, learning a bit more about his relationship with Mary Whipple. And this captain and Mary, they got married by one of the Ballou ministers in town in 1771. So that's kind of our first connection to right here. We know that he lived a very good, a very long life based on what's on the stone, but I got curious with what happened to his children. And like a lot of families of the time, they had some children who lived a very long life and some who sadly had a very short life. So he unfortunately lived to be a widow and to lose some of his children. One of his children is a person named Elida Tower. Elida Tower becomes Elida Ballou, and she ends up having two sons. One of those sons is named Ariel, and one of those sons is named Aiden. Aiden Ballou will go on to lead his own community of followers in a place called Hopedale. And if you haven't visited other parts of our national park, Hopedale is actually our 6th historic site. So it's a really important part of the local history. Something kind of interesting about Aiden is he decides that he is going to follow a lot of his ancestors and become a minister. But like a lot of those ancestors, he also decides he has to do it on his own. He doesn't want to be in a place surrounded by Ballous who are going to argue with him over theology, so he makes his own community, and that becomes the place called Hopedale. So if you're looking to escape the Ballou family in this cemetery, it's not going to happen. You have to go somewhere else. I passed around a map so you can kind of see, and we'll have it passed around again, just a bit about this landscape. But this was a really important place that started just for family and then grew into a place for everyone in the community who would have gone to that meeting house. I want to thank you all so much for coming out. I wanted to finish with a little passage from probably one of the most famous Ballous who's not buried here, and that is Sullivan Ballou. Sullivan Ballou served in the Civil War. He's not directly connected to anyone we're standing near, but these are his cousins, and these are his extended relatives. He is best known today because while he served in the Rhode Island Regiment, he wrote a letter back to his wife. He was serving on the battlefield, and he had a vision, a sense that he wasn't going to live, and unfortunately he was right. And so he wrote to his wife to kind of express some parting thoughts to her about how he felt and what he felt about the war. And his wife's name was Sarah Ballou. So he says to her, "Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth, not on this tour, we hope, and flit unseen around those they loved, I shall always be near you. In the garish day and the darkest night, amidst your happiest scenes and gloomiest hours, always, always, and if the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath. Or the cool air cools your throbbing temples, it shall be my spirit passing by. He writes about how he feels he has a chain to the earth and it's being ripped up. And he does unfortunately die in battle not long after he writes this. So one of our best known Balloos, a relative of the folks here, a very special place for all of us to visit. I think Cumberlandite was the magnet, like no pun intended, to get you all here, but it's great to talk about the people who live with us here as well. So if you were with me for the past half hour or so, you are going to join Mark in the orange hat. Mark is a geologist and he will take you into the woods with a weapon. Wonderful. Mark is absolutely wonderful, so if you were with me, you can follow him.
My name is Mark Dennen, geologist of Rhode Island DEM. I also teach geology at CCRI. I'm a volunteer with the Blackstone corridor.
Thank you.
And well, you're welcome. And I do bike patrol. I teach CPR for the volunteers, that kind of thing. And occasionally I do a tour. So, igneous rocks are rocks that form when a magma cools and crystallizes. So igneous rocks are made of crystals. There are basically two things that we classify igneous rocks based on. The first is its texture, which is how it was formed. And the second is its composition, or what it's made of. So, as an example, I'm going to talk first about texture and how the rock was formed. So this here is an example of a coarse-grained igneous rock. And it has crystals that are large enough. This is diorite, but it's like granite. See granite's across half the state, more than half the state. White to pink, but the thing that makes coarse-grained igneous rocks, the characteristic is that they have cooled slowly enough that the crystals are large enough that I can see there's a piece of quartz and there's a crystal of mica and there's a crystal of plagioclase. So they've cooled slowly enough that I can see individual crystals in the rock. Call that phaneritic, meaning it's visible. The other extreme is fine-grained or aphanitic, and I've got a piece I can pass around. This is a piece of basalt. So an aphanitic or fine-grained rock forms when the magma cools near the surface. So it cools very suddenly. With a coarse-grained rock, it cools over a period of thousands or hundreds of thousands or perhaps even millions of years. It takes that magma to cool. So in order to take that long, it must be very, very deep in the Earth's surface where things are relatively hot and where it can cool that slowly that the crystals get larger and larger. Fine-grained rocks form near the surface of the Earth where they cool in a geologic instant. And that could be, years, hundreds of years, thousands of years. But geologically, an instant. So they're still made of crystals, but the crystals are so small that you can't see them. And that's different. Typically you will see basalts in Rhode Island, but they're more like this. They're greenstones. That they've been under so much pressure that water molecules get forced into the matrix of the rock. So that's typically what you'll see. Basalts end up looking kind of like that, with greenish, blackish green. So that's texture. And I'm going to talk about Cumberlandite's texture in a minute. There's also, well, you know what? I'll talk about it right now. So take a look at any piece of Cumberlandite, and all these black rocks are Cumberlandite.
Wow.
And tell me, is it fine-grained or is it coarse-grained? Can you see individual crystals, or is it just a black matrix of microscopic crystals?
I can see crystals.
Okay, so how many people think it's fine grained? How many people think it's coarse grained?
We're both right.
You're both right, okay? Because Cumberlandite is what's called porphyritic. That it has, and if you look carefully, you can see these greenish white crystals of plagioclase feldspar. And then the rest of the black matrix is microscopic crystals. So what obviously happened here is you had two stages of cooling. You had a magma that was deep in the earth for a long, long period of time that allowed these large phenocrysts, we call them phenocrysts, of plagioclase to form, these large crystals. And then you thrust this magma up much higher to where it was much colder, and then the rest of it froze in a relatively short amount of time. So we know we have two phases of cooling. So that's called porphyritic, and that's cool. Now, I want to talk about composition, and this is what really makes Cumberlandite unique, is that the composition of the rock, we have rocks that we call felsic, and felsic rocks are more light colored. They're also lighter to pick up. That is my basalt. So this is a felsic rock. It has a lot of silica. 97% of the Earth's crust is made of silica rocks. And the silica is an atom of silicon with 4 oxygens around it. Makes a little pyramid. So the oxygens are the corners of the pyramid and the silicon is the center. And 97% of the rocks are made by taking these silica and polymerizing them, binding them together with a few other elements like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, that glue these rocks together in different ways, and how you put those silica tetrahedrons together makes the mineral. 97% of the rocks are that way. Now, when they have a lot of silica and a lot of light elements, we call it felsic, and that's like a granite. When you have a lot of iron and magnesium, it stains it black, and we call that mafic. And this basalt is an example of a mafic rock. The farther down you go in the earth, the more mafic the rocks become. So when you get to the mantle, it's made of a silica called peridotite, which has a lot of iron and magnesium. Now, what makes Cumberlandite unique or special is that it's ultramafic. Now, we'd call rocks that come from the mantle, where diamond mines come from, we call those ultramafic. This is more ultramafic than the ultramafic rocks. This has so much iron and magnesium that a magnet sticks to it. Okay, and that's really unusual. Iron, magnesium, and titanium in really huge amounts. And that, so the mixture of its porphyritic composition with its incredibly ultramafic makeup is what makes Cumberlandite so unique. Now that you've seen it, when you see Cumberlandite anywhere else, it's instantly recognizable. How many rocks have magnets stick to them?
None.
Also, if you pick up a piece of Cumberlandite, you're going to see it's really heavy. So I want to go look at an outcrop here. I want to talk a little bit more.
I have a question. These beautifully drilled holes, with all this stuff blasted out?
Because they blasted it out, yeah.
And dumped
They
it
mined
again.
it. Well, I can talk about it here. In the 19th century, they decided to mine Cumberlandite because, hey, it's got a lot of iron in it. How do I know it's got a lot of iron in it? You see that orange texture? It actually rusts. The part of Cumberlandite, the Cumberlandite deposit, in this way is heavier in magnesium. In this direction, it's heavier in iron. But it had a lot of iron in it. So they say it makes a good iron ore, so they tried making cannons out of it. I believe for the Civil War. Problem is, the cannons crack because, I guess, because of magnesium and titanium, it doesn't make the best cannon. given the metallurgical technology of the time. I'm sure we could make great cannons out of it now. But nowadays, we wouldn't care if it had iron in it because iron's very common. Titanium is very rare. So if you were going to mine this now, you'd care about the titanium in it because titanium is extremely valuable, unique. We make military jets out of it because it's so strong. And by the way, this rock is very strong, very hard to break up, which is why you see holes drilled in it because you blasted it out when you mined it. So you can see where they mined it up here. You can go around this way, but I'm not sure it's better, but you can try it. Oh, no. Yikes. Is that what this map over here?
Yeah, I have a piece of it at home.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, I do.
What's your name?
Oh, I'm not even for part of the group. I just go.
But what's your name?
Oh, Richard.
Richard. Everybody, I just learned something from Richard that there is an abandoned rail line down here.
Huh? It was
And I-
horse-drawn.
Horse-drawn.
Oh, my
I'm sorry.
goodness.
So to pull, I guess, to pull the iron out of here, the iron ore.
They were just letting it roll down.
So you can see the cliff that they blasted into. But this is part of the natural outcrop. And can you see all these lines that somebody's gouged into it?
Yeah.
Okay. The person who gouged these striations in here was the glacier. Glaciers, we think of glaciers as being like, you know, huge blocks of ice, which they are, but they're really dirty ice. And a glacier is like a bulldozer that just grabs everything, but instead of just pushing it forward, sometimes it gets on top of it and grinds it down. So the glacier would be moving across here and grinding. Every time the glacier moves, it grinds, and it's constantly moving. It's grinding rock and smoothing it out, and in sometimes gouging lines into it. So we know the glacier moved this way because we can see the striations. Over and over again, it moved in the same direction. Now that isn't unusual, you find that everywhere. But here's scientifically why Cumberlandite is so great. Because when you find a piece of Cumberlandite anywhere else, it's really easy to identify, right? How many porphyritic rocks with large phenocrysts that are magnetic do you find? Once you've seen it once, you recognize it. So geologists, when they're elsewhere in the state, they find a piece of Cumberlandite. Cumberlandite is this is a small deposit. It's the only place I know of in North America that has Cumberlandite. And it is at the end of that ridge is the limit of it. The high tension wire is this way. And I think the edge of that hill, certainly where the stop sign is, it's only 4 acres. So when you find a piece of Cumberlandite, who is from Jamestown that tells me they found some Cumberlandite?
It is found in.
This lady over here. So she's from Jamestown. They found Cumberlandite in Jamestown.
Yep.
So when we find Cumberlandite in Jamestown, we know exactly where it came from because it's the only place you get it. So we follow that boulder train. It's cookie crumbs that tell us exactly how the glacier moved. And we find glacial erratics, we call them, because they didn't deposit there, they got carried there. We find glacial erratics of Cumberlandite on Block Island. So we know the glacier moved from right here to Cumberland, Rhode Island, to Block Island. Okay, so that's really the only rock I know of that has been used to so precisely track the movement of a glacier. So scientifically, Cumberlandite is a great thing. It's also great that the town bought this to preserve it so people could see it, because it was private land, and to have this either get mined away or to have houses built on it would be a tragedy. In terms of, this is unique. The only where in the country. I don't know if there's anywhere else in the world that has rock of this exact composition. Now people say, where did this come from?
Yeah,
I'm not sure we really know. My guess is when you have a magma There's something called magma differentiation, where the light stuff floats on top and the heavy stuff settles to the bottom. And maybe it was a really big plume of magma, and maybe it had a really long time to be able to settle out the stuff that was extra heavy. And maybe that explains it. And then of course you had the 2 stages of cooling and all. But now how deep this goes, we don't know. And so I think magma differentiation is the best guess I can come up with for how something gets more mafic even than the mantle of the earth.
Mark,
But we don't know. Yes?
might it have come from the mantle?
If it came from the mantle's made of perodotite, and we have lots of places where we think, and this is where diamond mines often, diamonds are formed, is deep within the earth. You have so much pressure that creates a diamond, and it goes directly to the surface. And it probably doesn't happen now, it probably happened a long time ago, because most of the diamond mines are old. So this doesn't look like, if it was mantle plume that came right up, it'd be perodotite, and it's more mafic than perodotite. So I don't know, but my guess is the best explanation I can come up with is magma differentiation, but I don't feel great about that.
How old is the rock?
How old is the rock? Now, one of the other things is we usually can date igneous rocks pretty easily because of the minerals that are in them, but this is a very unique composition. So that I know of, nobody's radioactively dated Cumberlandite. However, it intrudes or comes into, you can tell when 2 rocks go next to each other which one's older, because it grabbed pieces of the older rock, the younger plume grabbed, and this is younger than the Esmond granite that's like, what, 1.5 billion years old, like that, 1 billion and a half years old. So it's younger than that, and it's probably not, and it's probably not younger than 500 million years because of what came later. So that best guess, they say between 600 million and 1 billion years is probably a pretty good guess, but it's not a very precise one.
That's very precise.
And probably that fits, because at about 600 million years ago, that time when Africa and North America were colliding, and you had a lot of horizontal pressure, and when 2 continents collide, just like 2 cars collide, they tend to push upward, and you get a huge Himalayan-sized mountain range, and that probably explains a force that might drive the rock suddenly upward. Would be, you know, massive earthquake kind of.
So areas in the world that do have high content of titanium, could Cumberlandite be prevalent there as well?
See, Cumberlandite is not a term outside of Rhode Island that we actually use. Sure. There are places where there's tractolite, which is like Cumberlandite. Cumberlandite's kind of unique because not only is it ultramafic, but it's porphyritic. But there probably are similar, the other titanium ores are probably similar. But I don't know that, because I don't know that many titanium mines.
Maybe in Russia, there's a big source of titanium.
Russia?
Yeah.
Yeah, Russia has just about everything because it's so big. You know? But yeah. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. We'll go back to the graveyard.
Thank you, Mark.